Hey guys, welcome back to another video with Iyanla Empowers. In today's video, we will be continuing coral reefs, and for this video specifically, we're going to speak on threats to coral reefs. So, what are the threats to our corals? Now, this presentation will not contain a lot of pretty pictures compared to the last video. However, the information is still there, and we're just going to get right into it. Now, remember before, let's do a little recap of the conditions necessary for coral reef growth. So from the last vid, we realized that coral reefs need 5 things, right? They need sunlight, they need clear water, they need warm water, clean water, and salt water. And these are the conditions that are necessary for the growth of coral reefs. Now, if these conditions jump off, they're not observed, then of course we will not have any coral reef growth. So when these conditions are not present or they are altered, it is considered a threat. Now, we have different types of threats. We have local threats and we have global threats to our coral reefs. We're going to start off with our local threats, and we're going to also compare and see what condition is missing with this threat. Come on, you know this happens every video, so I'm just over it. Let's just get into it. All right. Now the first threat we have is physical damage or destruction from coastal development, from dredging, from quarrying, and from destructive fishing practices and gear, both anchors and groundings, and recreational misuse, touching or removing corals. Now, do you guys remember in the last video when we were speaking on the significance of corals, and we said that they were significant for coastal protection, for tourism and fishing? And I also raised towards the latter part of the video that these benefits can also be threats. Now, when persons are fishing, they're going to the coral reefs because that's where a lot of fish are. It's a fish habitat. But how are they getting the fish? They're using destructive fishing practices. They're improperly disposing of their gear. So when they do bombings, or they use the fish nets and hooks and just break off the corals, it is damaging our corals. So then you can look at it and say, in the future, where will you get fish if you damage our corals? So it must be that there's fishing with sustainable fishing practices. That is very important, or it will be a threat, which it already is. Also, remember tourism, right? Tourism, persons would go and swim at the corals, swim with the fishes. However, during this activity, they can either touch and break or remove corals, and that is a threat. So then when you do that, where will you have corals to swim and touch and feel? You won't have it anymore because it was destroyed. So the significance of corals can also lead to the destruction of corals. So there must always be some sustainable practice, and we're going to touch on some solutions later in this video. Also, coastal development, dredging, quarrying also cause damage to corals, and we can see how. If we're developing, of course we're going to remove, we're going to relocate, we're doing all of this, it's damaging our corals. And majority of our corals are fringing corals, which is just separated from the coast by shallow, narrow lagoons, right? And you know that if it's shallow, I must say, and narrow, it is easy to get destroyed because it's close to the coast, right? Also, for local threats, we have pollution that originates on land, and we kind of touched on this before in our pollution video. So this pollution finds its way into coastal waters, and there are many types and sources of pollutions from land-based activities, and we're going to touch on a few. So the first is sedimentation. The same coastal development, right, causes sedimentation. Also from urban stormwater runoff, so when we have those heavy rains. We also spoke on runoff when we were speaking on like natural disasters, so you can also check out that video. Also, forestry and agriculture can also cause sedimentation. Now, sedimentation has been identified as the primary stressor for the existence and recovery of coral species and their habitats. Sediment deposited onto reefs can smother the corals and interfere with their ability to feed, grow, and reproduce. Now, we can link this back to one of the conditions that are necessary for coral reef growth: clear water, clean water. So we can touch on those two. Remember, the water must be clear so sunshine can pass through it, right? Remember that. Because corals are sensitive to pollution and sediments. Also, the water must be clean, right? Because the sediments can block out the sun, it harms the pulps, and it just damages our corals. So we see where that is a threat. Also, another threat is nutrients, right? Specifically nitrogen and phosphorus from agricultural and residential fertilizer use, sewage discharges, which includes wastewater treatment plants and septic systems, and also animal waste. Now, don't get it wrong, nutrients are good. They are usually recognized as being very beneficial, especially to marine ecosystems. But the thing is, where coral reefs are concerned, they have adapted to low nutrient levels. So they are used to having low nutrient levels. So whereas nutrients are beneficial, they have already adapted to not having much nutrients. So when you introduce a lot of nutrients into their habitat, it causes an imbalance, right? So these excess nutrients will lead to the growth of algae, and the algae blocks sunlight and it consumes oxygen, which the corals need for respiration, right? So when there's excess nutrients, algae starts to grow. So not only are they blocking the sunlight, they are also living organisms. They need oxygen. So they're going to consume and suck up, like their parasites, all of that oxygen that the corals would need. So then basically the corals are suffocating while the algae are fostering and growing, right? Because of this excess nutrients that was introduced. Now, as I said before, it leads to an imbalance, and excess nutrients also will support the growth of microorganisms like bacteria and fungi, which we don't want because they are pathogenic to corals. All right, so nutrients are good, yes, but for corals, too much nutrients, not so good. Causes algae to grow, causes fungi, bacteria to develop, and these are pathogens to the corals. Suck up all the oxygen, right? Pathogens, no rare. Bacteria and parasites from fecal contamination can cause diseases in corals, especially if they are stressed by other environmental conditions. Think of ourselves as corals. Would we want to lay down in feces, in untreated sewage? Do we want to run up and down in that? Do we want to roll over in that? No, we don't, because it will damage our health. It's overall unhealthy, and no one wants to do that. So why should corals endure that, right? Now, coral disease occurs in healthy ecosystems with the input of pathogen containing pollution, all right, which totally speeds up the intensity and the frequency of disease outbreaks. Toxic substances, including metals, organic chemicals, and pesticides, which are found in industrial discharges, found in our sunscreen, or urban and agricultural runoff, mining and activities, and runoff from landfills. Now, these pesticides, which contain toxic substances, can affect coral reproduction, their growth, and other physiological processes. Now, the herbicides in particular affects the symbiotic algae relationship, right? This can damage their partnership with corals and result in bleaching. So algae and corals have a symbiotic relationship. However, if it affects the algae, it will affect the coral, right? Now, metals such as mercury and lead and organic chemicals such as PCBs are suspected of affecting coral reproduction, the growth rate of corals, the feeding of corals, and the defensive responses. This is why pollution is such a big deal. It's not just plastics are hard to degrade. It's not just blocking of drains. It's the stuff like these that we have to go in depth with to really understand. And this is why we need to raise awareness. Alright, some other local threats include overfishing. Now, overfishing can alter food web structure and cause cascading effects, such as reducing number of grazing fish that keep corals clean of algae overgrowth. Now, before I move on, we're going to talk on the parrotfish just a bit. Now, parrotfish are these grazing fish that we're hearing about, which keeps the coral clean of algae overgrowth. So they will feed on the excess algae. Now, parrotfish are commonly becoming overfished, and it has become a problem to a point where government fishing authorities are suggesting for fishermen to now fish for lionfish, right, instead of parrotfish, because parrotfish are essential and they are dying. They're, going to be extinct at this point if you continue to fish for them. And of course, they are needed as the grazing fish in corals, right? So that's also another way fishing on a whole affects corals. Anywho, moving on, blast fishing, which means using explosives to kill fish, can cause physical damage to corals. Of course, if you're blasting the fish, you're using explosives, you're bombing, of course, corals are going to disintegrate and break apart for sure. Also, coral harvesting, interesting. I'm pretty sure a lot of us don't really hear about this often, but coral harvesting for aquarium trade, jewelry, can lead to over-harvesting of specific species, which leads to the destruction of reef habitat and reduced biodiversity. Okay. Now, the aggregate effects of these stressors can decrease resilience of the reef overall and increase susceptibility to disease and invasive species. Invasive species can create an imbalance in the biological checks and balances of our reef ecosystem, and we get an idea of that. Alright, let's talk a bit on global threats. Alright. Now, as atmospheric temperatures rise, so do seawater temperatures. This warming can cause corals to lose the microscopic algae that produce food that corals need. And this is the symbiotic relationships coming to life now. So corals need algae, algae need corals, right? Right. So why do corals need algae? Because these microscopic algae produce the food that the corals need, right? Right. But if it becomes excess, there's excess algae growth, or there's destruction in corals, it leads to an imbalance in their relationship. So there must be a level that needs to be maintained all throughout. So if algae are gone, which as a result would be if the atmospheric temperatures keep on rising, the corals will lose their coloration, and this condition is known as coral bleaching, because the loss of algae reveals the white color of the calcium carbonate structure underlying the bulbs. Alright? So algae getting a lot done. They're working overtime. Right? Because these algae basically are hiding the white color of the corals, right? Now, if they're gone, corals will be bleached, end of the corals, right? Now, severe or prolonged bleaching can kill corals, coral colonies, and leave them more vulnerable to other threats such as infectious diseases. Right? So you're bleaching them, basically taking off their skin. And then what can they do? They're just working with flesh, and if they're just working with flesh, it leads them to be prone to so much other things, right? Just think about it like that. All right, let's talk about ocean acidification, and this refers to the change in ocean chemistry in response to the uptake of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Now, the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is, of course, equal with that in seawater. So when atmospheric conditions or concentrations increases, so do oceanic concentrations. Did we know that? What is in the air is in the sea, basically. That's what it's saying. What's in the air is in the ocean. So carbon dioxide increases in the air, carbon dioxide increases in the ocean, the sea. Now, carbon dioxide entering seawater reacts to form carbonic acid, which increases acidity. So we're seeing how that happens. So when the carbon dioxide enters the seawater and the carbon dioxide reacts, it forms carbonic acid, and it increases acidity in the water. Now, each year, the ocean absorbs about 1/4 of the carbon dioxide emitted from the burning of fossil fuels such as oil. Why did I say oil? I was trying to I was like, wow, sir. So it's like I know I'm about to say coal, but I'm trying to say oil first. So it comes off as oil. Wow, our minds really do stuff, you know. So oil, coal, and natural gas. So the ocean or the seawater is absorbing all of that. Well, 1/4 of the carbon dioxide emission from that, I should say, increases ocean acidity. All right. Now, increases in the ocean acidity, which is measured in pH values, reduces the availability of dissolved salts and ions, which are needed by corals to form the calcium carbonate structure. Remember, you know, corals are made from calcium carbonate, right? If ocean acidity increases, it does not lend dissolved salts and ions to be available, and these are needed to form the calcium carbonate structure of our corals. So we're seeing what's going on right there. All right. Now, consequently, coral growth and reef growth can be slowed, with some species affected more than others. If acidification becomes severe, coral skeletons can actually dissolve. Oh my word. On a local level, nutrient enrichment due to runoff from human activities on land can also cause increased acidity in coastal waters, which speeds up the effect of ocean acidification. So it's also coming from that excess nutrient which we spoke about. Now let's just talk about protecting our coral reefs a bit, right? Now, it is important that individuals and groups such as fishermen and farmers and hoteliers and even tourists are educated, right, in an effort to increase awareness of the importance of our reefs, all right, and also encourage them to protect them. Maybe sometimes to stop, they just need a little encouragement. They need to know a little bit of the effects, what exactly is happening, so they can stop, right? Now, governments have established and should continue to establish marine protected zones around important coastal regions inhabited by coral species and fish as the official stance or policy in the fight to guard our reefs. Declaring marine protected areas encompassing critical coastal regions that have a wide variety of fish and the coral species to minimize and regulate the use and access. Sometimes all we need is a little protected area, just a little out to say don't go there, right? And we'll find persons not going there. Good, we're conserving that area, right? Now, legislation reform and law enforcement that minimize the potential for pollution and damage from external and internal forces such as cruise ship operators, or large fishery companies, for example, that use trawling as a method for fishing that significantly changes the reef ecosystem. So it's not just having it done, it's reforming these legislations and enforcing the law, right? Not allowing things to just slide. Enforce the law. That is so important, especially for these big companies. A regional environmental response by Caribbean governments could take the form of a combination of legislation and institutions to promote all of the above. So all that we have mentioned before, right? Adopting the policy of ecotourism, which emphasizes preservation of environment and sustainable development, right? And where we're not preserving, we should also conserve, right? Now, establishing parks and reserves, also an option, and also environment impact assessment for development and commercial projects. So what happened is a lot of development occur and there is little to no environmental impact assessment. Now, if these are done adequately by the right people, it will really save a lot of these corals and coral reefs, right? Because now they know where to build, where not to build, how to dispose of this, where should this dune turn, this, that, and the third. How can we move without damaging our reefs? What can be done? Should we relocate? Should we not build here? Should we not build at this section? So many questions, so many answers can come from environmental impact assessment. What type of fish are there, right? Is it that we alone will be affecting the corals, or is it that fishermen are already affecting the corals? This is already affecting the corals. It's right near a drain, so excess nutrients, pollution are affecting the corals. Will we cause extra damage? What can we do to conserve the corals and still build here? You understand, there's so many questions, there's so many answers that can come from an environment impact assessment. Now, that's the end of corals on a whole. I really hope that you learned a lot. You are more aware of the effects and what we as humans are doing to harm our coral reefs. All right, and if you see someone doing something that they're not supposed to do, reef pollution, coral damage, whatever the case is, stand up and say don't do it, because it will ... in the long run. It's very important, and I am here to raise awareness. I am here for you all to understand, not only for your academic studies, but also on a whole, right? Thank you so much for listening to Iyanla Empowers. I will catch you in the next video. Bye, guys.